Hello, this is ASEAN Movie Pulse Talks number 14. I am Panos Kotzathanasis and I'm here with Grace Han and Tom Wilmot. And today we're gonna talk about one of the most iconic anime titles of all time, probably Satoshi Kon's Perfect Blue. This is it's an unusual film, very, complex, very interesting, but also it has a lot of things happening for it before it was actually produced. So Tom, would you like to say a few things about that?
Yeah, so I mean, we're quite lucky that we kind of got the film in the form that we did in hindsight. It was initially a project by Madhouse to adapt Yoshikazu's Takeuchi's novel Perfect Blue: Complete Metamorphosis, but it was going to be a live action series direct to video. But before that went into production, there was the Kobe earthquake in 1995. And the part of the studio was damaged. Like, they had some issues with the production after that, so the budget had to be cut and they could only afford to produce a original video animation. So Satoshi Kon, who had worked on the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure series as director for a few episodes, came on, and along with the screenwriter, he got permission from the author of the original novel to make some alterations to the story, and now we have Perfect Blue as we have it.
It's perfect as we have it. Okay, and Grace, would you like to tell us a bit what the film is about?
Yeah, it's really interesting trying to summarize Perfect Blue, because I think that in and of itself is a point of controversy. But as we can get from the film at face value, the film is about a pop idol turned actress called Mima Kirigoe, and in her transition to her acting career, she starts to feel a sense of alienation from her peers. And in the same vein, she starts to realize that someone is stalking her behind the scenes. And so in this whole dilemma where she's trying to figure out who she wants to be as she's acting for this crime drama, as she's figuring out, like, oh, someone is following me this entire time, her world starts to cave in on itself as the murders start to become reality. So that's the film in a nutshell. And I guess we can discuss more about what it actually means or what's actually going on.
Yeah. Okay, so right now the whole concept of the pop idol and all those pop groups is rather large. Also in cinema, we had a number of documentaries during the last years. We had BNK48, that was about the Thai group. We had Tokyo Idols, about the Japanese pop groups. And we recently have 9 Muses of Star Empire, which is about the Korean aspect of the whole concept. But Satoshi Kon is talking about this thing in 1997, which was not even, I don't think it was that big at that time, at least not as big as it is now. So we can say that the film was also a bit of prophetic. I don't know if you interpret it like that, Tom.
I mean, definitely in hindsight, I mean, at the time, maybe I'd interpret it more of just kind of, it's this sort of delve into this question of identity, particularly with just the whole concept of Mima's character, looking back on it now, especially with all the social media platforms that we got and people being sort of like minor celebrities on some of those, it's like, it's interesting in hindsight, definitely.
So let me ask you something, you both, because I'm not very much into this thing, but since you are younger than me, is any of you into K-pop or J-pop or something like that? Grace?
Gosh, when I was in middle school, it was all the rage.
Oh, really? Yeah, Tom?
I've put it on to annoy friends once or twice in the past, but I mean, I'm not going to lie and not say that there aren't some catchy songs that have gotten me through the workday. But I wouldn't consider myself a fan. At least not to the degree that it's represented in this film, anyway.
Right.
Okay. And so what we have in the film is like a really realistic portrait of what the life of those idols, how the life of those idols is, which again in the documentaries I mentioned was presented like decades later. And so we have a few things about them. For starters, they work like crazy. They don't exactly own their life. They have a very tight schedule and they have to perform all the time on or do social messaging or whatnot. And also they are not particularly rich. As we see, the protagonist of the film lives in a small apartment. She's not Lady Gaga or anything, despite the whole fandom or something. And also their career span is very small. I think there is like 25, 26, maybe they are considered already old, and then they have to go someplace else, which usually is acting, but not all of them manage to achieve. So for me, the whole concept is, I don't know, I think it's a bit sad. I don't know how you consider the whole concept of this pop idol in Asia, Grace?
I mean, I think it's really key to think back to the status of the pop idol, right? So I think if you're BTS or something, like, yeah, you're going to live in Gangnam in like the nicest apartments along the river. But for Mima and Cham, like, they note in the film over and over again that they're like a minor group or that they're an underground group. They're just up and coming. I mean, they get really excited when they place 83rd on the top 100 list. So I think it's really important to note that the idol reality is very different for how popular you are and depends so much on your group success rather than just thinking that all idols are successful across the board.
Tom, what do you think about the concept of idols?
Well, I mean, I think that's partly where my love of this film kind of comes in, is that I didn't really know anything about the reality of like the life of idols and that whole kind of craze in Japan, and it was just kind of eye-opening to see like the celebrity culture, at least the way it was portrayed in the film. And then obviously you guys saying after that it's quite an accurate portrayal. It's like, well, it seems horrifying. I mean, it just doesn't really seem worth it. But then, I mean, even in the film, it's like there are so many occasions where Mima's kind of justifying, usually to other people, why she's doing stuff and why it's important for her career. And this is the right move. I mean, I know she does it to her mum earlier in the film, and even her mum sounds like she's only really gotten used to the idea of her being a singer recently. And it's like, it seems very fleeting. And it kind of makes sense as well when you look at some people's acting careers, you know, from those countries. Like when you look over it, you see they were around for kind of like 5-10 years, and then where did they go? They just seem to kind of disappear off the face of the earth. But it's just the kind of, you're 15 minutes and then you're done.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting within the film that they press so hard that she should go into acting to begin with. I mean, I don't know the industry intimately enough to actually say what it's like, but just from judging from the periphery, I think it's very, like, being an idol is a very fleeting thing, right? Like, you can only be an idol when you're in this fresh age of like in your teens, maybe early 20s, because after that you're too old. And acting is a career that is more sustainable, or so people think within the industry.
Yeah. I mean, there's even that kind of idea in the film of like, especially what you're saying, Grace, about the fact that you're kind of younger and, you know, you're kind of like this young, fresh, idealistic figure. You know, I mean, I think later in the film, she's accused of being tainted, you know, because she's taking on a kind of more mature public appearance, and that's somehow seen as kind of, you know, not appealing to a lot of people and kind of wrong, and it's like kind of ruining this image of this kind of perfect figure that she was, which is like, of course, unsustainable. And I guess that's why it's so fleeting, because it's like no one can maintain that.
And also it says something about the movie industry, which occasionally functions like a dump for all those professions. Like you see, like fashion models after 26, they think they should become actresses or actors if they want to continue in the show business. And we have the same with idols. It's like, I don't know how this thing proceeds. Like, why do they end up with acting? Seems, I don't know, it seems more difficult. I don't know, but they all end up acting at the end. I think also it shows in the film that it's not exactly an easy path. We see that the protagonist of the film ends up in some very awful things, like nudity and sex and scenes that she doesn't like. So what do you think about this part, Tom?
Well, I mean, they don't even seem to be the most kind of lucrative films. I mean, at one point, I think her manager says that she's going to be in a direct-to-video release, and it's not ideal, but it's something, and it's like, you do kind of question. I mean, throughout the film, I mean, almost from the very beginning, in fact, at the very beginning, when she's kind of been rushed around in this dressing room, she's not in control of her life at all in any aspect. I mean, I agree with what you said earlier, Panos, in the sense that it's sad. Like, it just seems like a kind of sad existence. It seems only really be to the benefit of either people looking in at this modified version of you, or the people who are actually making the money out of it, you know. And they kind of suck you dry for everything you've got, and then that's it. You know, you kind of yesterday's news.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of that too, like the scenes where Mima really just doesn't have any control. So much of it speaks to her vulnerability, not just as an actress or an idol, but just as a woman as well. Like she's always in this power differential where she cannot speak up because she has these pressures to comply.
No, I agree. That's the. I mean, I'm sure we'll get onto some of the more graphic scenes at some point, but the way that she's kind of forced to show that she's mature and different, it's so kind of almost torturous to a point. And the fact that she doesn't really have a say in it, and you know, every time she kind of smiles, which kind of becomes very fleeting later in the film, it seems very put on, you know, and not. I mean, I guess her whole character in a way is kind of fake. I mean, that's the whole thing with her character. She's kind of trying to find who she actually is and who she actually wants to be, because she's kind of left one manufactured version of herself behind to go into another. So,
and so I guess this whole concept of identity and reality and fantasy is one of the main ones in the film, in fact, in all of Satoshi Kon's filmography. And in my opinion, in this film, we actually have let us say, as long as Mima is an idol, we see three realities. There is the one that she has to present when she's on stage or when she's on screen, to present a certain persona. Then there is the one of how the fans interpret that persona, because we see some of them, let us say, when she's giving a live performance on a music concert, some of them think that maybe she's looking at them, or she has feelings for them, or maybe she's in love with them, or something like that. So this is yet another reality. And then we have the third reality, which is actually what is happening behind the scenes to her, which is completely different than both the previous perspectives. So what do you think about that, Grace?
I mean, I think a lot of it is schizophrenia, right? Like, as she tries to juggle these different personalities, I think they have like an official analysis or diagnosis in the film, but I think it's interesting to think of the film through the lens of schizophrenia, because the idea of schizophrenia, which comes from like the 1950s, dubbed by Gregory Bateson, I think, in Palo Alto, which is where I live right now, it's funny because schizophrenia was originally seen as like this breakdown in communication. And I think that's kind of fundamental to how the whole film revolves around this breakdown in communication within the talent agency and with her friends originally at CHAM, but also like this breakdown in communication between her analog life and like her on-screen lives. So her on-screen life on the internet, but her on-screen life on TV as well.
Tom?
Yeah, I mean, she's kind of disassociated with this Mima's Room website that's been created. That's this very disturbingly intimate diary of daily events, you know. But just on the sort of different realities in the film and stuff, it's like, yeah, it's I think the most striking thing to me just upon this watch was how many times we cut back to people later in the film who are just discussing Mima on the street. Like, I think it's the same three guys that we keep coming back to, and they've always got like a newspaper or something. They're always like making some kind of comment, and it just keeps kind of hammering home that like nobody really knows what's going on in her life, but everyone has got this perceived reality of who she is and what she's doing and why she's doing, and is she really running that website? You know, does she actually hate it? It's And I think, yeah, it's like what you said, Grace, that breakdown in communication, her being so kind of isolated, like that leads her to a point where she's sort of questioning everything, her own actions, what she's doing, if she's really done stuff. I don't know if we're going to touch on some of the way that sequences sort of transition into each other in the final third of the film, but it's so disorientating to watch, and it kind of puts you right into her mindset of where she is.
And okay, but do you think that she is schizophrenic? And was she from the beginning, or did the whole concept of the idol make her that way?
It's weird because you would imagine, like, on one hand, yeah, like maybe she is delusional. I mean, that's how the film tries to sell it, right? But then on the other hand, Rumi's really delusional too, right? Like she's the one who's dressing up as Mima, as we see in the final like part of the film, final sequence. Um, and she believes that she is this pop idol in the prime of her youth, even though she is well past it. So I think there are multiple delusions and schizophrenics to be had in the film. I guess we even have like a stalker fan, right? Like who is also schizophrenic in a way because he thinks that Mima is literally talking to him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first time I watched it, I've seen it twice now, and I think the first time I watched it was incredibly confusing and amazing for all the right reasons. But watching it again the second time, I still don't really know if she's schizophrenic. I don't think so, but I also don't really think it matters. You know, for the purposes of the film and for the purposes of her character, it's more, for me at least, about she's trying to find out who she is really, who she is now. You know, not this manufactured version, whatever that may be, whether it be the pop idol or what the public see or what she's supposed to be, or, you know, it's that kind of comes to fruition at the end in the final confrontation where she kind of screams something along the lines of like, I am who I am, or just, you know, it's something very kind of on the nose like that, but it's very cathartic in that moment, just because, yeah, the whole film, you do get to the point where you're questioning whether she must be ill, like she's seeing things, she blah, 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 blah. But I don't know for the fact that it's animated as well, is I don't know if she's really seeing herself, you know, or if we're just supposed to be seeing that as an audience, and she is seeing Rumi, but she's just so exhausted and run down, it's just confusing, you know. I think there's the one sequence where she chases an illusion, but then I don't know if that turns out to be a dream or not, you know. So I don't actually know how many times she hallucinates, or if it's just kind of a more of an internal battle.
Yeah. It's obvious that Satoshi Kon plays with the whole concept of what is real and what is not, and what is in her mind and the rest of the protagonist's mind. And I also find it a bit amusing that close to the end of the film, when you finally think that you understood what was going on all the time, then you have this duel between these two women where, let's say, the villain flies. You know, so again, the reality is distorted once more, and you don't know, did this happen? Plus, okay, we are telling the whole thing off, but okay, it's 20 years before the film, so it's okay. So, and the actual ending that someone else ends up in the mental hospital, but again, Mima does not seem like an exactly sane person, particularly with this last scene who destroys the whole thing again. Distorts everything once more. So, yeah. What do you think about this whole distortion thing, Grace?
I mean, it's really, I think in a way, like the open-endedness is really key for the viewer, because I think so much of what a lot of Japanese auteurs are doing at the time, including like Miyazaki, for example, are thinking about is like not just spoon feeding anime to you for face value. And so I think Satoshi Kon is very much in this genre of auteurs who is like, oh, it's kind of up to you to determine like what's actually going on, which is kind of funny, right? Because that's kind of contrary to the whole thesis of the film. Like Mima has to find out what she actually is, but in the end, it's us who has to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I think again, the first time watching it, not sure, blown away, all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. Second time watching it, a lot more of it is a lot more concrete for me, at least in terms of my feelings on the film. I think it's a happy ending. I think it's quite a triumphant ending. I don't think I mean, yeah, I mean, we are literally going into the nuts and bolts of it, but I mean, I don't think her kind of looking at herself in the mirror in the car and, you know, kind of saying the line and stuff. I don't think there's any hint there of her still being sort of mentally ill or anything. I think it's quite a concrete, almost like wink and a nod to the audience of her literally saying, I'm okay now, like everything's fine, you know, which I was really pleased with. And then you get these happy credits and everything. It's like, it's great. Like,
Okay. And also, what is very interesting in the film for me is that it was one of the first anime. Akira paved the way. Then it was Ghost in the Shell, but I feel that is pretty close by about anime being animation being not just for kids, but essentially for grown-ups. And obviously, Perfect Blue is not for kids in any way, not for its messages or narrative, and also because there is sex and violence quite intense in the film. But what do you think about this aspect, the sex and violence in the film? Exploitation or part of the narrative, you feel, Grace?
It's really difficult, I think, just to. I mean, I think when I watched the film twice as well, and so like when I first watched the film, I was watching it within my dorm room back in university, and I just felt so much shame just watching this film, like in front of my Catholic roommate of all people, right? Like it's like I'm so sorry, I didn't expect this to happen. Like I did not read the summary before like we went into watching the film, and that's just the feeling that I walked away with this entire time until I rewatched the film like earlier this week. But I think in terms of just like the sex and violence of it all, I mean, I think like the concept of animation being for kids is really something that was inspired by TV anime and TV animation, if I recall correctly. Like I think it's very much of a phenomenon from the 60s, 70s with Looney Tunes and Saturday morning cartoons in America at least, and presumably with a similar phenomenon in Japan. And they
like Astro Boy in Japan,
Yeah. So yeah, you know, I think it's interesting. I think it's also interesting to think about Satoshi Kon saying, I think his final project was supposed to be his first family-friendly film or something like that, but he never actually finished it because he passed away before he could. So I think that's also interesting to think of Satoshi Kon just never thinking of himself as a family-friendly, children-friendly filmmaker to begin with.
I mean, I think the thing that stands out for me is you mentioned Akira and Ghost in the Shell, and obviously there was a whole wave of sort of I don't want to say super violent, but kind of adult animations, especially the direct-to-video ones in like the 80s and the 90s. But and I'm not saying Perfect Blue was the first of what I'm about to say, but it was the first, at least, that I saw. It was one that was very much grounded in kind of the real world. Whereas Akira and Ghost in the Shell, they're very much kind of like this high concept sci-fi stuff. And for me, it kind of stripped away that idea of like, oh, if it's going to be animated, there has to be something worth animating. You know, it has to be something that you couldn't film in live action. And I think there are a lot of aspects of Perfect Blue that you couldn't film in live action, or if you tried to, it'd be very difficult to. You probably could do it now, to be fair. But it was still very much, I mean, even down to the character models and designs and stuff, no one is very kind of like stylized. Everyone just looks very normal. It doesn't look like kind of typically anime film characters. So yeah, so I mean, the violence and stuff, it actually wasn't as shocking to me as it may have been to others on a first watch, purely because the film establishes itself as being in the real world. So when kind of real world violence comes into it, it kind of fits. It doesn't feel as jarring. It's still shocking in the way that it's shown. And because it's animated, I think they get away with kind of showing a bit more than you could in live action and still get the rating that it got. I don't know what it was rated in Japan. I know it's an 18 still here in the UK, but yeah, I mean, it definitely opened my eyes to the fact that it doesn't have to be crazy futuristic bike chases and huge cyberpunk cityscapes and stuff. It can just be the real world.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. I think in the beginning of the film, they have like this poster of like a super hyper stylized like anime girl. It's super brief, but it just kind of like shows you how they're differentiating themselves.
Yeah, it's
The
almost
film
taking the
from
mick, like how stylized she is. I know the bit you're on about. It pops up
yeah,
like 2 seconds. It's on a truck or something.
yeah,
Mhm, mhm.
big sparkly eyes.
Yeah. And once more, the characters in the anime look Western, right? Right? I don't consider them Oriental, but they speak Japanese, but their faces are not Oriental. I'm not sure. What do you think about this aspect? They look more Western people, no?
It's not something that really crossed my mind, to be honest. I thought it was.
Yeah, because
I would disagree. To be honest, I thought they looked quite Eastern Asian.
I guess it departs a lot from like Atom Boy and um, I guess like the typical anime designs from then, like from that era, and including Akira, who also adopts like that sort of roundish facial structure and like, but I think rather than thinking about Eastern and Western, I think it's more about naturalism, like you said.
Mhm.
Yeah, like its proximity to real life.
Mm.
Yeah, because I wanted to mention this because of the Ghost in the Shell live action movie, which was accused for whitewashing. But the director and Mamoru Oshii and the writers of the manga said that the characters in Ghost in the Shell are not Asian, essentially. So I feel the same about this one too. If you see like Mima's eyes, in particular her face, to me it looks American or European or something like that. But I think this is, we have kind of gotten used to it because this is usually how the characters in anime look like for the most part. This is like the style, let's say.
No. I think at least for me, just on that note, whereas a lot of the characters do look normal, I do think the characters who are supposed to be like very beautiful or something do fit more into the typical anime sort of character design. I do think that's why Mima perhaps does have kind of like the bright and sparkly eyes, and like, and then you contrast that with her stalker, who is a very intimidating looking character. I just think, again, it's like it's the people who are just normal background characters look that way. The people that are meant to be kind of like a bit more beautiful and appealing are like a little bit more so, but not to the point where it's a bit ridiculous. And the same going the other way, where I mean, like, a stalker is clearly meant to be like a loner. He's not like a very great looking guy, kind of, but it's not sort of caricaturizing it. It's just making it clear, but just in a more subtle way than it would be of like a typical anime villain in like a TV series or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting to think about the main cast of characters and how like differentiated they are from the rest of the film. And then you see like the anonymous characters, like the crowd scenes, and they're just like all very haphazardly drawn. And so I think the level of detail is also a key factor in just thinking about how we should also think about these characters. Like so much of it is about finding their individuality. And I think a lot of that can be expressed through the naturalistic design.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And in general, how do you feel about the drawing, the character? I feel like I watched it yesterday again, and I don't think, I think it has aged well. It doesn't look, I don't know, not even retroid sometimes, particularly the backgrounds and the whole title are really impressive. Like Mima's room, for example, is like, I don't know, great with the posters and everything that's going on. What do you think about this part, the drawing level? Grace?
I mean, I was really taken aback by Mima's room, and just like the level of detail that we see there, and the level of intimacy that we see in that room too. Just like the way that the attention that they paid to the little pots that they had hanging on the walls and like the posters and everything. But I think it's also interesting because my first reaction upon just rewatching the film was like, wow, this is really like this seemed a little last minute. Like it doesn't, and I guess part of it is because some of it was last minute because of the earthquake and everything. But um, yeah, I just again thinking about like the limited animation that we see in a lot of the film where um they do it really well. I think they incorporate it really well, like where the idol Mima, for example, is prancing through, she's literally just shifted across the screen, right? Like she
Mm.
isn't doing any extra movement, um or animated movements at least, to express her pathway. um versus just thinking about, yeah, just thinking about how much they try to pull back on Mima scenes and how they try to recut, which also worked with the film, right? Like where she wakes up over and over again in the same bed, but
Mm.
they reuse that scene over and over again. So in
Mm.
some senses, I think I could definitely see like, oh, this is where they pull back. This is where they really wanted to us to focus on, just depending on how much detail was in that particular scene.
Yeah, and I mean that's what great animators do, right? It's like now that you mention it, it does make sense if they did have sort of a very limited production budget, even for the animation. But the fact that Satoshi Kon and the way he approached it and making it's like, okay, we've got this limited situation, we kind of got these limited resources, how can we make it? I mean, yeah, you talk about the sort of illusion Mima's movements and stuff, but I mean that works so well for the role that particular character plays in the film, because she's meant to be kind of like this graceful, almost angelic like figure, so it doesn't come across as kind of like, oh, this is where they're sort of cutting corners with the animation. It actually works really well with what they're trying to achieve with the character. I think one of my favorite moments in the film is the final chase, when Rumi is chasing Mima, and we see the sort of angelic Mima in the red dress kind of like floating after the real Mima, and then in the reflection in the window we just see Rumi kind of like panting and like sweating and like chasing after her. And it's like, I love that contrast. I think the film uses like reflections a lot in general, to like really great effect. But yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to add in terms of the drawing. Yeah, I mean, Mima's room is probably the standout because, like you said, there are just so many kind of like small details that tell you a lot about the character as well, like the little stuffed animals and everything. It kind of builds up this idea of who she is before we even really get to know her properly. So.
And okay, regarding the animation, like say the movement of the characters, I feel that okay, I understand what Grace is saying, that there are some moments that the movement is minimal. You can see that, but again, there are some others like the live performances, for example, that are quite impressive and realistic and impressive at the same time. I don't know what you think about the animation in general, Grace.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how much effort was put into the rape scene in particular. Um, because you have so many individually moving characters in that one scene, and they're all doing something like very different from each other. And yeah, like I can't imagine what that process must have even been like to be in that studio and to work on that as well, to just be so intimate and familiar with the material at the time, each frame one at a time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree, because that is such a pivotal scene. I mean, like it's funny actually, because it's a little bit meta in the film where they kind of talk about how, oh, this is like a turning point for Mima in her career. This is going to be like one of the defining moments where she'll become like kind of actress over idol. But it's also really like the turning point in the film in many ways, where like after that, she kind of goes downhill sort of mentally. So, I mean, yeah, they really had to nail I guess like the intensity and just like the realism in that scene, like because it is really uncomfortable. I mean, we kind of joked about it earlier, but genuinely watching it, it's still like it's very upsetting to watch. But yeah, I mean that is because of how effective the animation is and the use of color as well in that scene. Like it's very kind of like these flashy colors. I know it's meant to be like a club or something. on the animation as well. I think I touched on it earlier, but just the transitions for some of the scenes. I mean, there are so many moments where sort of Mima will be like sort of turning, and then she'll turn into a new environment, and it's so seamless, and it really kind of like brings you into her mind, and just sort of like how time is kind of warping around her situation, and she's just so disoriented. And I think, yeah, if you just did that, it'd be easier to do that with kind of standard cuts and, you know, just move from panel to panel. But the way they do it, it was definitely more ambitious, and it pays off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess if you just think about the animation production as well, I mean, you have different layers that make like an animated scene, right? So you have like the character layer, and then you have like the background. And it's interesting just to think about that process as well, to think about like how Bima's not actually in any of these backgrounds, like quite literally, and they can just switch that out whenever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, they use all the material like so well. Sorry, Karen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I don't usually notice the voice acting in anime for some reasons. I don't know, most voices don't really do a thing for me. But in this case, I feel that Junko Iwao, who is Mima, is pretty great. Like the softness of her voice from the beginning gives specific essence to the character. And, you know, the few scenes where she yells or she raises the tone really make a difference to the story. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Her voice acting, Tom?
I mean, to be honest, she doesn't sort of stand out to me in particular. Again, like I don't really. I think you only really notice voice acting sometimes, especially when it's not in your language that you're speaking. It's kind of difficult to tell if someone's, you know, speaking with like a clunky accent or something. Like you just can't really tell. But on the voice actor for Rumi, her performance later in the film, towards the end, when she's kind of doing her best Mima impression, really adds to that scene in terms of how kind of unsettling it is. It's this, because it sounds like a 40-odd-year-old woman trying to be a 18-year-old singer or a 25-year-old singer. You know, it doesn't sound right. It sounds kind of childlike and disturbing. So I like that. But
Yes.
I think I've decided with Panos more on this one. I mean, I think whenever I watch anything that has any sort of singer or idol or whatever, like the first thing I always want to listen to is like, is their speaking voice the same? Like, is that the same thing as their musical voice? Like, are they using the same voice actors? I'm not really sure. And so I think the very beginning when they open with the singing and then they transition and then they show Mima speaking, like plain voice to the audience, I was kind of not taken aback, but I was just like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, it very much fits her character, like both of these voices, her singing voice and her speaking voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also shows the difference between this duality of who she presents on the stage and who she is in reality. You can hear that she's the same person, but you can actually hear two different voices, which I feel is a great asset in Zuko and Wao's performance. Okay, I guess that's it more or less. So let's end with a question, a weird question. So, Grace, Satoshi Kon or Hayao Miyazaki?
Oh, Satoshi Kon. I think Miyazaki. Oh, but I think Satoshi Kon is better for like when you're watching by yourself, but Miyazaki is better for crowds.
Yeah. Okay, Tom.
all right, it's easy for me. It is Miyazaki, but I mean, you know, that's a horrible question because it's making it sound like they're both great filmmakers. It's an awful shame that Satoshi Kon passed away when he did, because it's annoying to think about how much more he would have been able to give in terms of to the world of animation, just because he was so talented. But I mean, yeah, what he's left behind is amazing. And to be honest, I've only seen this and Tokyo Godfathers, so I'm looking forward to getting into his other work, just because I don't want to go through it all so quickly, because then that's it. You know, I mean, like there won't be any more. It's the same with Miyazaki, actually. I don't think I've seen The Wind Rises, just because at the moment that's his last one, and I kind of am not ready for it to end yet, although I know his other one is in production.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I'm with Satoshi Kon also, like Grace, but particular because I feel that okay, I've seen all films of both, and I feel that Miyazaki, his films address children more on a number of levels. But so, like, children will not understand Satoshi Kon. It's on another level of intelligence and narrative depth. So I prefer him just for that. Okay, the animation in Miyazaki's films obviously is on another level because, okay, also because he directed films decades later than Satoshi Kon. But until I was like 10, Miyazaki. After that, probably Satoshi Kon. Okay, let's say.
What Satoshi Kon film did you watch at 10?
No, Miyazaki until I was 10, but then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No one would allow me to watch Satoshi Kon at 10, probably. You know?
No, they shouldn't. Like, they shouldn't. This is a debate for another time because there is a goddamn adult meaning in these Miyazaki movies. This is. I'm someone who Ponyo is probably one of my favorite Miyazaki, if not my favorite. So.
Okay. All right. Before this turns into a huge fight and we don't speak to each other again, we will finish this whole thing. So. If you like these recordings, you can subscribe to our channels. We are doing one every week. And from Panos Kotzathanasis, Grace, Han, and Tom Wilmot, see you soon, probably next week. Bye.
Okay, bye.